The slam of the door echoed like a knife slicing through the air. The once quiet house trembled, every window frame rattling as if recoiling from an outburst of fury. Daniel, the only son of Alice, stood tall before the door he had just slammed shut, his bloodshot eyes blazing, his broken voice shouting, "Mother, you're old now. You have no rights left. Get out of this house!" Alice froze, her trembling hands clutching the armrest of the chair to keep from collapsing. This house, the small red brick home nestled in a quiet neighborhood, had been hers for over 30 years. It was not just property. It was memories, the place where she and her husband had smiled in joy when they welcomed Daniel into the world, the place of countless simple meals filled with laughter, and now, the very son she bore and raised treated it as nothing more than an object to seize. Alice was 62, petite, her gray-streaked hair tied neatly at the back. She had once been a gentle elementary school teacher, beloved by students and respected by colleagues. Since her husband passed away a decade earlier, she had lived quietly, devoting herself to raising Daniel. She wasn't wealthy. This house was her only asset, along with a modest pension that allowed her to live frugally. She never imagined she would one day face being driven out of her home by her own child. Daniel, 30, was the opposite of his mother. He brimmed with ambition, flaunted success, worked in real estate, and mingled with people of the same kind. Alice always hoped he would settle down, start a family, and eventually appreciate the value of a home. But he grew more distant each year. He rarely came by, and when he did, it was only to argue, always talking about selling the house, about the billion-dollar projects he yearned for. To Daniel, the red brick house was an outdated burden, standing in the way of his freedom. Alice had once dismissed it as youthful recklessness, but today the cold tone of his voice, the ferocity in his eyes made her realize Daniel didn't just want to sell the house, he wanted to push her out of his life entirely. The living room grew stifling. Alice sank into the worn sofa where her husband had once read the paper every morning, telling herself Daniel might only be angry in the moment, but deep in her heart, unease had taken root. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting Alice's shadow long across the wall, making her look like a fragile silhouette swallowed by the vast room. Memories flooded back, Daniel's tiny hand gripping hers as a child, his promise at graduation, "I'll protect you, Mom." All of it now felt like shards of broken glass, sparkling yet cutting deep. In that moment, Alice didn't know that this was only the beginning. The door Daniel slammed shut had opened a new kind of war, not with a stranger, but with her own son. After Daniel stormed out, the house fell into an eerie silence. Alice sat for hours, listening to the ticking of the wall clock, the faint whisper of wind through the window. Familiar sounds that once brought peace now stabbed at her heart like knives. She had long grown used to a solitary life. Mornings meant brewing a pot of tea, opening the weathered wooden door, and gazing at her small garden with a few yellow chrysanthemums. Lunches were simple meals, vegetable soup, braised fish eaten alone and tidied up after. Evenings she spent rereading old textbooks, sometimes grading assignments for children in the neighborhood. Life was modest but steady, rich in quiet devotion to her home and its memories. The only void was Daniel. Every time she heard keys in the lock, her heart leapt with hope. But each time he only stopped by to grab a few things, muttered a few indifferent words, and hurried off again. Alice knew the outside world was his true passion, lavish parties, grand projects, millions on paper. Still, she held faith. She believed her son was merely caught up in youthful pursuits, that one day he would rediscover the meaning of home. For that reason, she kept the house pristine, as though preserving a place for Daniel to return to. That afternoon, after calming herself, Alice began tidying the living room. While stacking magazines on the table, she spotted a thin file sticking out of a drawer. What startled her was the bold title on the cover, "Last Will and Testament." Her hands shook as she opened it. The first page bore her own name, Alice Parker. Below were words declaring she agreed to transfer the entire house and remaining assets to Daniel. At the bottom was a signature eerily identical to hers. Alice's heart pounded. She had never signed any will. She had never even considered dividing her property, especially while still alive and healthy, so why was there a forged document with a signature so precise it made her shudder? Questions flooded her mind. Was Daniel involved, or had someone else exploited her? She steadied herself, carefully stowing the file away. But unease spread through her like darkness swallowing light. She looked around the living room, family photos on the wall, the old bookshelf, the tablecloth she embroidered as a young woman. Each piece was bound to her life, and now they were reduced to assets for someone to claim. In that moment, Alice knew the peace she had cherished was broken. Something sinister was unfolding, and that fake will was the first crack exposing the truth. That night, Alice could hardly sleep. The image of the forged will haunted her every time she closed her eyes. She tossed on the old bed once, a place of warmth with her husband, now only emptiness and a pounding heart. The next morning, she checked her important papers. She pulled out a locked metal box with deeds, insurance contracts, savings books, and old letters. One by one, she sorted them, but unease only grew. Some papers she distinctly remembered were missing. Most alarming was her bank savings book. The balance was far less than what she recalled a few months ago. Pages showed large withdrawals, signed with a copy of her signature but not hers. A chill ran down her spine. Who had done this? Her mind turned to Daniel. The same son who had shouted her out of the house last night. Could he truly be cold enough to forge her signature, drain her account, and scheme to seize the house? The thought broke her heart, yet it was the only explanation. Searching another drawer where Daniel once stored papers, she uncovered loan documents and mortgage contracts bearing her name, but signed without her knowledge. The sums were staggering. Loan amount, $200,000, collateral, Parker residence. Alice's hands shook violently. This was no longer suspicion, it was proof. Someone was impersonating her to put the house at risk. Suddenly, a knock on the door. Alice scrambled to hide the papers before opening it. Standing there was Sophia, her cousin's daughter, holding pastries and asking awkwardly, "Auntie, are you okay? Yesterday, I heard Daniel shouting." Alice eyed Sophia, wanting to ask more, but the girl avoided her gaze, her voice trembling. Clearly Sophia knew something, but dared not say. Alice felt an invisible circle of silence tightening around her from Daniel, even from relatives. Everyone seemed complicit in some hidden secret. Alice turned back inside, lifting a cold teacup to her lips. The bitterness lingered on her tongue. She knew her quiet life was shattered. At that moment, she decided she had to uncover the truth. The next morning, Alice spread the pile of documents across the dining table, as if trying to piece together fragments of her own life. Each loan statement, each mortgage contract with forged signatures cut into her like blades. The house she had guarded for decades was being gambled away in colossal debts she had never even known existed. One question pounded in her head. Who did this? And worse, when would she lose everything? She called the bank. The receptionist, polite yet detached, checked the records and said, "Mrs. Parker, all transactions were confirmed with your signature. If you believe there is a problem, you may file a formal complaint. But please note, your house is already listed as collateral." Alice's ears rang. The words collateral file hit like a hammer. After hanging up, she sat trembling, realizing this wasn't just about lost savings. Her home itself was at stake. That afternoon, she confronted Daniel directly. He was pacing the living room, barking into his phone, barely acknowledging her. "Daniel, I need to ask, why are these loans in my name?" Alice held the document before him. Daniel hesitated for a split second, then smirked. Don't overthink it, Mom. It's just paperwork. I'm investing. The house will be sold eventually. There's no point in you clinging to it. Alice's voice shook. You used my name without asking? Daniel shot her a cold glance. Don't make a fuss. This is my chance to change our lives. Once I succeed, you'll benefit 100 times over. And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Alice frozen in shock. That night, Alice sought out Sophia again. She hoped the girl might shed some light. In the dim kitchen, Sophia clutched her teacup, her face tense. When Alice mentioned the will and the debts, Sophia lowered her eyes and whispered, "Auntie, I'm not completely sure, but I once overheard Daniel talking with someone. They said the house had to be sold fast." Alice's heart sank. "Are you certain?" Sophia shook her head, lips tight. "I only caught fragments, but I think there's a lot Daniel doesn't want you to know." Those words confirmed Alice's fears. She left Sophia's house under the heavy night sky, feeling the world press down on her shoulders. Back home, rifling through the papers again, a bill slipped out, a $50,000 transfer to an unfamiliar name. Alice stared at it in disbelief. She had never seen that account, let alone authorized such a transfer. That was when she understood. This wasn't just Daniel's reckless ambition. It was a calculated financial scheme, and she was the prey. The following morning, Alice sought answers from the rest of her family. She thought, if Daniel is really behind this, surely someone else must know, or at least have heard whispers. She first visited her cousin Margaret, who lived only a few blocks away. Margaret, an older woman known for her bluntness, had always been close to Alice. But when Alice brought up the mortgaged house and the strange will, Margaret's face drained of color. Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. "Alice," Margaret finally said, her voice low, her eyes avoiding Alice's. "Some things are better left alone. Daniel is your son. I'm sure he only wants what's best for the future." Alice's heart sank. That evasive tone, half hiding, half placating, only convinced her further that something was terribly wrong. Later that afternoon, Alice phoned her nephew Henry, who worked at a notary's office in the city. She hoped he could verify the will's authenticity, but the moment she mentioned it, Henry gave an awkward laugh. "Aunt Alice, I can't get involved. Anything tied to property, especially with Daniel's name, honestly, you should just talk to him directly." Alice almost dropped the phone. Even Henry, someone she trusted, wouldn't touch the matter. That night, as the house sank into shadows, Alice sat alone, staring at the forged documents. Around her, the familiar furniture seemed to close in like walls of a trap. She realized she was surrounded by a web of silent family members who turned away, neighbors who avoided her gaze. The loneliness pressed down until it nearly suffocated her. But in that very moment, fear hardened into determination. If no one will tell me the truth, I'll find it myself. The next day, she returned to the bank, this time asking to meet the branch manager face to face. In the sterile chill of the office, she laid the papers on the desk. "Sir," she said firmly, "please tell me who handled these transactions. I swear I never signed them." The manager gave the documents a cursory glance, tapped at his computer, then replied flatly, "According to the records, you did. If you suspect fraud, you'll need to file a formal claim through an attorney, but the signature matches the sample in our system." Alice's stomach dropped. The sample in their system. It meant her signature had been cloned, embedded into official files. Whoever was behind this had prepared meticulously, leaving no obvious trace. Leaving the bank, she felt like a wanderer lost in a labyrinth. Streets that once felt familiar now seemed cold and hostile. Only one option remained: keep digging, even if it meant confronting Daniel directly. That evening, rummaging through Daniel's desk, she found a receipt crumpled in the back of a drawer. Her breath caught. It was for another $50,000 transfer, this time with a note scribbled, "Down payment, property deal." Alice sank into the chair. There was no denying it now. Daniel had used her name to withdraw money, mortgage the house, and was preparing a real estate transaction. To him, the red brick house was nothing more than a commodity. That night, Alice couldn't sit still. She knew if she waited any longer, the house might slip from her grasp. She decided to follow the trail. Alice remembered old Mr. George, the neighbor who always sat on his porch with a cup of tea. He was one of the few people in the neighborhood who paid attention to everything. That evening, she walked over and sat beside him. After a few casual remarks, she quietly asked, "George, have you seen Daniel bringing anyone to the house lately?" George frowned, thinking, "Oh yes, I saw him meet with a few strangers, well-dressed men in suits and ties, driving expensive cars. I even overheard bits of their talk, something about a transfer deal. At the time, I figured Daniel was just discussing business." Alice's chest tightened. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. The bank withdrawals, the forged will, and now these business meetings right inside her home. Back inside, she sat at the dining table under the dim light, her hands trembling as she sorted through the stack of documents again. One detail froze her breath. Tucked within the files was a draft blueprint of a real estate project. In the corner was the logo of a large city company with a handwritten note. "Transfer of Parker residence. Projected price, $450,000. Alice's entire body shook. The house, her life's keepsake, was already listed for sale, even appraised, without her knowledge or consent. Just cold numbers on a page, stripping away decades of love and memory. Her mind echoed with Daniel's cruel words, "There's no point in you keeping it." To him, the home that had cradled their lives was merely merchandise. Overcome by despair, Alice felt herself suffocating. Yet in that sea of pain, a spark of resolve flared. "I won't let it happen. Not silently." The next day, she discreetly followed Daniel when he left the house. Keeping her distance, she watched him enter an upscale cafe. Through the glass window, she saw him sit across from a young man in a tailored suit with a glossy briefcase. They shook hands, then bent over papers. Alice's heart raced when she spotted a blue folder on the table, identical to the will she had found earlier. Her knees nearly buckled. This was no longer suspicion. Daniel was actively preparing to sell the house, with every document lined up. When he finally left, Alice pressed against a wall to stay unseen, her pulse hammering. She knew this was no longer a family quarrel. It was war. That night, she sat in the living room with the incriminating papers spread neatly before her, the forged will, the transfer receipts, the real estate draft. When Daniel walked in and saw them, his expression hardened instantly. "You went through my things?" he snapped. Alice's voice cracked but was steady. "You forged my signature. You mortgaged this house. You're planning to sell it. Why, Daniel? Why would you do this to me?" Daniel let out a cold laugh, his voice echoing through the room. "Mom, stop pretending you're still sharp. I'm doing this for the future. Selling this house gives me the capital to rise. Or do you want to see me remain nothing forever?" "But this is my home." Alice's hands gripped the table. "Every memory, every drop of sweat, what right do you have to decide for me?" His face darkened as he stepped closer, eyes blazing. "I'm the only heir. This house will be mine eventually. You're stuck in the past. I have to move forward." Alice's eyes welled, but she didn't cry. She realized words were useless. Her son was lost in ambition, blind to everything else, even her. In a hushed voice, she whispered, "If you still have any humanity left, stop now. Ambition will destroy you, Daniel." But he snatched the papers, stuffed them into a drawer, and stormed upstairs. The slam of his door echoed like a cruel reminder of who he had become. Alice sat alone in the silence, her chest tight. She had lost the first battle, but deep in her gaze, determination burned brighter. If my son chooses this path, then I won't stand still. It was the moment Alice decided to investigate further, to gather undeniable proof. The peace of her home was gone forever. The next morning, once Daniel had left for work, Alice sat for a long while, then forced herself to act. She knew that unless she found solid proof, everyone would dismiss her words as nothing more than the emotions of an old woman. Her heart pounded as she slipped into Daniel's room. She searched through drawers, files, and piles of papers, every creak of the wood making her flinch with fear of being caught. At the back of a deep drawer, she found a black notebook, its spine frayed from being shoved in hastily. With trembling hands, Alice opened it. Inside were scribbled numbers, dates, names, even strange symbols. One entry leapt out at her. Bank, $200,000. Mortgage on Parker House. Beneath it, in messy scrawl, must close this month or risk losing opportunity. Alice gasped, her fingers shaking. This was no simple paperwork. This was a deliberate plan. She turned more pages. A name kept appearing. Lucas. Next to it were notes. Transfer 1, $50,000. Transfer 2, $30,000. And then a chilling line. Complete once title deed changes hands. Alice shut her eyes, her mind spinning. Lucas. Was he the man she had seen with Daniel at the cafe? If so, then this man was a direct link in Daniel's scheme. Quickly, she pulled out her old phone and photographed every page. Then she carefully returned the notebook to its place. She couldn't risk letting Daniel know she had seen it. That evening, Alice sat on her porch, clutching her phone. The photos of that black notebook felt like a torch in the darkness swallowing her life. But fear gnawed at her too. If Daniel dared forge signatures and mortgage the house, what would he do if he found out she was secretly investigating him? The sunset cast a golden glow over the red brick house, making it look solemn, like a silent witness. Alice looked up at it and whispered a vow. I won't let you be sold. Even if I have to fight my own son, I'll fight to the end. That night, she opened her long-abandoned diary. For the first time in years, she wrote carefully, recording everything she had discovered. Dates, amounts, names. This would be her own case file, proof that she was still sane and determined. The next day, Alice decided to seek help. One name came to mind. Richard, her late husband's old friend who had once worked in real estate. If anyone understood shady dealings, it would be him. Alice walked to his modest home at the end of the street. Richard, now in his 70s but still sharp-eyed, welcomed her warmly. But when she mentioned Daniel and the mortgaged house, his smile faded. I know, Richard sighed. A few weeks ago I saw Daniel downtown with a young man. Looked like a lawyer or some kind of partner. They didn't notice me, but I heard Daniel say clearly, once the deed is transferred, we'll split as agreed. Alice's teacup shook in her hand. Do you know who that man was? I think his name was Lucas, Richard recalled, frowning. He's known in real estate circles someone who bends the rules. If Daniel is working with him, Alice, it's dangerous. Very dangerous. Alice's heart sank. The name Lucas again. It matched the notebook. Seeing her pale face, Richard leaned closer, voice grave. Alice, listen to me. If you're going to fight this, you'll need undeniable proof. Without it, the court will only believe official documents. Alice nodded slowly, her voice hoarse. I understand, but I can't let my house go. It's all I have left. Richard's eyes softened with sympathy. He pulled out an old folder and handed it to her. These are contacts I still have in the industry. Maybe one of them knows more about Lucas. Start here. Alice clutched the folder like a lifeline, thanked him, and left with a mix of dread and fragile hope. Walking home under the swaying trees, she realized something. Once a gentle schoolteacher, she was now an unwilling detective, piecing together clues to defend her home. That night, by lamplight, she opened Richard's folder and scanned the names. One stood out: Emma Collins, young attorney, experienced in property disputes. A thought flickered. Perhaps it was time to find an ally. The next afternoon, Alice decided to trace the name Lucas. With the folder Richard had given her, she went to a small cafe that offered free Wi-Fi, borrowing Sophia's old laptop to dig for information. Hours passed before a result appeared: Lucas Miller, a real estate attorney. Alice's heart jolted. The man she had seen at the cafe with Daniel, the name written repeatedly in the black notebook, it was him. But what confused her was the public image. Articles online described Lucas as reputable, someone who had even helped families avoid fraud in property transfers. That didn't match the schemer Alice pictured. Her brow furrowed. Why would Daniel work with a so-called legitimate attorney? Could it all be different from what I think? Driven by both fear and hope, Alice dialed the office number listed online. A woman's warm voice answered. "Good afternoon. This is the office of attorney Lucas Miller. Would you like to schedule a consultation?" Alice hesitated, then whispered, I'd like to confirm something. Does Mr. Miller currently represent a client named Daniel Parker?" Without pause, the secretary replied, "Yes, that's correct. Mr. Miller is assisting Mr. Parker with protecting his mother's property rights." Alice froze. Protecting. Her pulse pounded. That was the opposite of everything she thought. If true, Lucas wasn't Daniel's accomplice. He was his lawyer, supposedly defending Alice's rights. Her hand shook as she hung up the phone. Her mind spun. Had I misjudged Daniel all along? Could all the forged papers and secret deals be a misunderstanding? But before that fragile hope could settle, Alice's phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. "Auntie, I just saw Daniel at the bank with a stranger. They were talking about releasing funds quickly. Something isn't right." Alice gripped her phone, her breath sharp. If Daniel truly meant to protect her, why rush withdrawals? Why secret transfers of tens of thousands? It was like a puzzle where pieces kept shifting. One side painted Daniel as a loyal son, the other as a cunning fraudster. A thought pierced her confusion. Maybe the lawyer is just a cover. Maybe Daniel hired Lucas so everything looks legal on paper while secretly plotting to sell the house. Alice pressed her palms to her face, torn between despair and fury. The truth remained tangled, but one thing was clear. She couldn't stop digging. She whispered into the empty house, "Daniel, if you're really protecting me, then tell me the truth. But if this is a mask, I'll strip it away." 2 days later, when Daniel left town on a short business trip, Alice knew it was her only chance. Fear gnawed at her, but determination pushed her forward. She went into his study and stared at the laptop on his desk. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. To her relief, the password wasn't complicated. It was Daniel's own birthday. She pressed enter, and the screen lit up. She clicked through folders until one caught her eye. Project Confidential. Her heart pounded as she opened it. Dozens of PDF files appeared: contracts, photos, scanned documents. One file froze her blood. Agreement of sale, Parker Residence. She opened it. At the top, in bold, Seller, Alice Parker. Buyer, Private Real Estate Company. Sale price, $450,000. And at the bottom, a signature identical to hers. Alice gasped. The will had been bad enough, but this was worse. A full sales contract, forged to look like she had already agreed. She kept clicking, her eyes blurring with shock. Then she found photos: Daniel shaking hands with Lucas in a sleek office, the logo of the same real estate company visible in the background. Alice's chest tightened. The so-called lawyer defending her rights was clearly working with Daniel's buyers. Another file contained notes. Finalized deal this quarter. If mother resists, claim she's mentally unfit, request guardianship. Prepare fake medical records if necessary. Alice's hand flew to her mouth. Her own son, planning to declare her incompetent to strip her not only of her home, but her dignity. Tears streamed down her face, but she forced herself to act. She inserted a small USB drive and copied everything. Then, carefully, she closed the laptop as if untouched. That night, she sat by the window, clutching the USB. Moonlight washed over her weary face as she whispered, "If you've chosen lies, Daniel, then I'll fight you with the truth." For the first time, Alice no longer doubted. This wasn't confusion. This was a conspiracy, and her son was at the center of it. That evening, Daniel returned earlier than expected. Alice had just hidden the USB in her old sewing box when she heard the front door slam. His footsteps were quick, heavy, too heavy. "Mom," he called, his voice tight. "Have you been in my study?" Alice's heart skipped. She forced herself to stay calm, turning from the kitchen sink. "Why do you ask?" Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Because my laptop wasn't where I left it, and some files look touched." Alice gripped the counter behind her. "I don't know what you're talking about." He stepped closer, his voice low and sharp. "Don't lie to me. Did you open my computer?" Silence stretched. Alice wanted to deny again, but something inside her snapped. She lifted her chin, her voice trembling but firm. "Yes, I saw the contracts, the forged signatures, the plan to sell this house as if I were already dead." Daniel's face twisted with rage. "You went too far." "No, Daniel," Alice cried, her voice cracking. "You went too far. This is my home. Your father and I built our lives here. And you—" Her hands shook as she pointed at him. "You're willing to destroy me for money?" He froze, fists clenching. His jaw tightened, but no words came. "I trusted you," Alice whispered. "Even when you shouted at me, even when I found the false will, I still hoped I was wrong. But now I know the truth." Daniel's eyes burned as he hissed, "You don't understand. This is bigger than you. That house is nothing but bricks. I need it. I deserve it, and if you stand in my way—" He stopped, his breath ragged. Alice felt a chill run through her, but she stood her ground. "If you destroy me, you destroy yourself. Is that what you want?" For a moment, Daniel's face flickered anger, guilt, defiance all at once. Then he slammed his fist against the wall so hard the frame rattled. "You'll regret crossing me, Mom," he growled, before storming upstairs. Alice collapsed onto the chair, her body trembling violently, but through the fear, she clutched the secret USB hidden in the sewing box. It was her shield, her weapon, her only proof. She knew now. This wasn't just a family rift. It was war, and the battlefield was her own home. The very next morning, Alice left the house before Daniel woke. She clutched her worn handbag, the USB hidden safely inside. Each step toward the bus stop felt heavy, but her resolve carried her forward. Her destination, the office of Emma Collins, the young attorney whose name Richard had given her. When Alice arrived, the receptionist greeted her kindly and led her into a modest office. Behind the desk sat a woman in her 30s, sharp-eyed, yet warm. "Mrs. Parker?" Emma said, standing to shake her hand. "Richard told me you might come. Please sit." Alice's fingers trembled as she placed the USB on the desk. "I don't know if you'll believe me, but my son, Daniel, he forged documents. He's trying to sell my house behind my back." Emma's brows knitted. "Tell me everything from the beginning." For the next hour, Alice poured it all out. The fake will, the forged contracts, the missing savings, the black notebook, the secret meetings, and finally the files she had copied from Daniel's laptop. Emma listened without interruption, her pen gliding across the notepad. When Alice finished, her voice breaking, Emma leaned forward and said firmly, "You did the right thing coming here. What you have, if the documents on this USB match what you say, could expose fraud, forgery, and even conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Alice's eyes brimmed with tears. So I'm not crazy? Emma shook her head gently. No, Mrs. Parker. You're not crazy, you're being targeted, and we can fight this. With practiced hands, Emma plugged in the USB and scrolled through the files. As the forged contracts filled the screen, her jaw tightened. This is serious. If Daniel tries to use these in court, he could argue you consented. But the forged signatures? I can bring in a handwriting expert. We'll prove they're false. Alice clasped her hands together, whispering, "Thank God." Emma looked at her with a steady gaze. It won't be easy. Daniel may fight back hard, especially if he's working with a lawyer like Lucas Miller. But if Lucas is knowingly part of this, he could face consequences too. Alice's breath caught. Then there's hope? There's more than hope, Emma said firmly. There's a case, but we have to move quickly before your son finalizes the sale. For the first time in weeks, Alice felt the crushing weight lift slightly from her chest. She nodded, her voice trembling with both fear and fragile relief. Then please, help me save my home. Emma reached across the desk and squeezed her hand. We will. Over the next few days, Emma began working swiftly. She contacted a handwriting analyst to examine the forged will and sales contract, arranged for the bank records to be subpoenaed, and discreetly started building a case. Meanwhile, Alice lived in a constant state of fear inside her own home. Every creak of the floorboards, every sound of Daniel's footsteps upstairs made her tense. She tried to act normal, cooking meals and tidying the house as always, but the secret knowledge of her alliance with Emma burned in her chest. One evening, as she folded laundry, Daniel suddenly appeared in the doorway. His eyes were sharp, suspicious. "Where were you this morning?" he asked. Alice froze. "I went for groceries." Daniel smirked faintly, stepping closer. "Strange. I checked the fridge. Nothing new in there." Her throat went dry. She tried to hold his gaze, but her heart raced. Did he know? Daniel leaned down, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You've been talking to someone, haven't you?" Alice clutched the fabric in her hands. "What are you saying?" His eyes narrowed. "Don't play innocent, Mom. I can smell it. Someone's filling your head with ideas. Who is it? A neighbor? That old man Richard? Or—" His lips curled. "A lawyer?" Alice's chest tightened. She forced herself not to flinch, but Daniel's words pierced straight through her composure. After a long silence, he straightened up, laughing coldly. "You know what? It doesn't matter. Whoever's helping you, they can't stop me. This house is mine, whether you like it or not." He turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Alice sank onto the chair, her whole body trembling. Later that night, she met Emma in secret at the cafe, her voice shaking as she relayed what happened. Emma's expression darkened. "He suspects you. That means he's desperate. We need to move faster." Alice clutched her teacup. "Emma, if he finds out for sure, I don't know what he'll do." Emma placed a steady hand over hers. "Listen to me, Mrs. Parker. You're not alone anymore. Let Daniel suspect all he wants, because when the time comes, we'll have the evidence to bring him down." Alice nodded faintly, her eyes glistening. For the first time, she felt a flicker of strength return. She wasn't just a frightened mother anymore. She was ready to fight. A week later, Alice overheard something that chilled her to the bone. Daniel was in the living room, phone pressed to his ear, pacing furiously. His voice was low but urgent, and Alice, standing silently in the hallway, caught fragments of the conversation. "Yes, Lucas. File the petition. We'll claim she's no longer capable of making rational decisions. Once the court grants me guardianship, everything will be under my control." Alice's knees nearly gave out. Guardianship. He was planning to have her declared legally incompetent. Her hands shook as she covered her mouth to keep from gasping aloud. She heard Daniel continue. "Don't worry. I have the medical papers ready. The doctor owes me a favor. He'll sign off on her dementia. Once that's in, the judge won't question it." Alice stumbled back into the kitchen, her heart pounding like a drum. My own son wants to erase me as a person. That evening, she rushed to Emma's office, her voice breaking as she recounted every word. Emma's expression turned cold and sharp. "This changes everything. If Daniel files for guardianship with forged medical records, it could move quickly. We have to act now." Alice whispered, almost in tears. "He wants to declare me insane, to take everything, even my name." Emma reached across the desk, her tone firm and protective. "Listen to me. He won't succeed. We'll bring in our own doctors to testify about your health, and we'll expose the fraudulent paperwork. But for that, I'll need those records. If he has them, we must get copies before he submits them." Alice nodded weakly, determination flickering through her fear. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Daniel met Lucas in a dimly lit office. Lucas slid a folder across the table. "These are the petitions. Once we file, your mother won't be able to contest the sale. You'll have full legal authority." Daniel smirked, though his eyes carried a restless glint. "Good. The sooner this ends, the better. She's been difficult." Lucas gave him a warning look. "Be careful. If she finds an attorney, things could get messy." Daniel's jaw tightened. "She's just an old woman. No one will believe her." But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. Deep down, he sensed Alice was stronger than he had imagined. That night, Alice couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring out at the faint glow of the street lamps, clutching her notebook. Her mind replayed Daniel's words. "Once the court grants me guardianship, everything will be under my control." The thought of being erased, treated as if she no longer had a mind of her own, filled her with both fear and fury. By morning, she resolved to act. She gathered the photos of Daniel's black notebook she had saved, the receipts with forged signatures, and the notes about medical records. Then she met Emma at her office. Emma studied the evidence carefully. Her brow furrowed. "This is more than just fraud, Alice. If Daniel truly has a doctor willing to sign false statements about your health, that's a criminal conspiracy. We'll need to move fast." Alice's voice trembled. "But how can I prove I'm still me? That I'm still in my right mind?" Emma reached across the desk, her tone steady. "By showing the truth. I'll schedule an independent evaluation from a certified psychiatrist. If you're healthy, and I believe you are, the report will dismantle Daniel's claim. At the same time, we'll petition the court to block any guardianship until the investigation is complete." Alice took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, hope stirred. Later that afternoon, Sophia stopped by Alice's house. She brought fresh bread and sat quietly, listening as Alice explained everything. Sophia's eyes widened in disbelief. "He's really trying to declare you insane? That's monstrous." Alice gave a tired smile. "That's what greed can do to a person. It turns your own child into a stranger." Sophia grabbed Alice's hands. "Koi, chao se lam chung, chao se ke tat kanyang zi chao biet, ein ta se komte chezo mai." Alice's eyes glistened with gratitude. She finally felt she wasn't fighting alone. A few days later, the storm Alice dreaded finally arrived. Early in the morning, a knock thundered at her door. When she opened it, a courier handed her a thick envelope. Inside was a legal notice. Petition for guardianship of Alice Parker, filed by Daniel Parker. Her hands trembled as she read the words. Daniel had done it. He was asking the court to declare her mentally incompetent and to grant him full control of her estate, including the red brick house. Alice sank into her chair, the paper slipping from her fingers. For a moment, The room spun, but then she forced herself to breathe deeply, clutching the armrest until her heartbeat steadied. She whispered, "No, I will not let him erase me." That afternoon, Alice rushed to Emma's office with the petition. Emma read it quickly, her jaw tightening. "He moved fast. But that's okay, we were expecting this. We'll file a motion to contest. The key will be to prove your mental clarity and expose the forged documents he plans to use." Alice bit her lip. "He has people believing I'm losing my memory. Even some of the family think so. How do I fight that?" Emma leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "With witnesses, with medical evaluations, with evidence. Don't forget, Sophia and George are ready to testify for you. And if we can trace the falsified medical records back to him or his accomplices, the case will turn in our favor." Alice nodded slowly. Fear still weighed heavy on her chest, but now it was mixed with resolve. Meanwhile, Daniel was in a sleek downtown cafe meeting with Lucas. He tapped the petition with a smug smile. "Once this goes through, the house is mine. She won't be able to fight it." Lucas adjusted his tie, speaking cautiously. "Don't get too confident. Guardianship cases can get messy. If her lawyer is any good, she'll demand a medical evaluation." Daniel scoffed. "I already have that covered. Marianne is preparing the report. It'll say she's showing early dementia. Once that's on record, no judge will listen to her." Lucas gave him a long, unreadable look. "Just remember, if this blows up, you're not only risking the house, you're risking prison." Daniel's smile faltered for a second, but he quickly brushed it off. "It won't blow up. I know my mother. She doesn't have the strength to fight me." But even as he said it, he couldn't shake the unease gnawing at the back of his mind. The day of the first hearing arrived. Alice stood outside the courthouse, clutching the folder Emma had prepared for her. The air was cold, heavy with clouds, and her hands trembled not from the weather, but from the weight of what was about to unfold. Emma touched her arm reassuringly. "You're not alone, Alice. Remember, the truth is on our side. Just stay calm and answer clearly. That's all you need to do." Inside the courtroom, Daniel sat confidently in a tailored suit, Lucas by his side. He greeted relatives who had come to watch, his smile calculated and charming. To them, he looked like the devoted son, ready to care for his aging mother. When Alice entered, whispers rippled through the room. Some family members looked at her with pity, others with doubt. Daniel leaned back, smirking, as if the outcome were already certain. The judge, a stern man with silver hair, called the session to order. Lucas rose first. "Your Honor," he began, his voice clear and smooth, "we are here today to address the unfortunate decline of Mrs. Alice Parker. Over the past year, she has demonstrated confusion, memory lapses, and an inability to manage her affairs responsibly. My client, her only son, seeks guardianship to protect her well-being and prevent financial harm." Alice's chest tightened as she heard those words. Each sentence was like a dagger, painting her as helpless, weak, incapable. Lucas continued, holding up a document. "We submit into evidence a medical report from Dr. Marianne Caldwell indicating early-stage dementia. This report confirms that Mrs. Parker is no longer fully competent to handle her estate." Daniel lowered his eyes solemnly, playing the role of the concerned son. Emma stood slowly, her face calm but her voice sharp. "Your Honor, we strongly contest these claims. Mrs. Alice Parker is lucid, independent, and fully capable of managing her own affairs. We have both witnesses and evidence to prove that the so-called medical report is fraudulent. Furthermore, we believe Mr. Daniel Parker has engaged in financial misconduct using his mother's forged signature for loans and attempting to sell her home without consent." The courtroom stirred with gasps and murmurs. Daniel's smile faltered. The judge leaned forward. "These are serious accusations, Miss Collins. Do you have evidence?" Emma nodded firmly. We do, and our witnesses are present to testify. Alice's heart pounded, but she lifted her chin. She knew the battle had truly begun. The judge called the first witness. Sophia stood, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as she walked to the stand. She looked nervous, but when her eyes met Alice's, she drew strength. After swearing in, Emma asked gently, "Sophia, how often do you see Mrs. Alice Parker?" "Almost every day, Your Honor," Sophia replied. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "I live nearby. I visit her, we talk, sometimes I bring her food. She remembers everything we talk about. She pays her own bills, cooks her meals, and manages her home. I've never seen her confused or forgetful the way Daniel claims." Emma nodded. "So, in your personal experience, has Mrs. Parker shown any sign of dementia?" "None at all," Sophia said firmly. She glanced at Daniel, her voice rising with courage. "The only thing I've witnessed is Daniel pressuring her. I once overheard him talking about selling the house behind her back, and when I confronted him, he threatened me to stay silent." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Daniel's jaw tightened, his fists clenching under the table. Lucas quickly rose for cross-examination, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Sophia, you're young. You don't have medical training, do you?" "No," Sophia admitted, her chin lifting. "Then how can you possibly judge whether someone is suffering from cognitive decline? Isn't it true you simply want to believe Mrs. Parker is fine because you're emotionally attached?" Sophia's cheeks flushed, but she didn't waver. "I may not be a doctor, but I know the difference between a healthy, clear-minded woman and someone who doesn't recognize her own family. Alice is perfectly capable. What Daniel is doing isn't love, it's greed." The room erupted in murmurs again. The judge banged his gavel for order. Next, George, the elderly neighbor, took the stand. His weathered face carried quiet strength. "I've lived next door to Alice for more than 30 years, he said. "I see her tending her garden every morning, handling her chores, walking to the store. She's as sharp as anyone I know." Emma leaned in. "Mr. George, have you ever seen Daniel at Alice's house with other people?" George's eyes hardened. "Yes, I saw him with men in suits, talking in the yard. I overheard him mention selling the house quickly. He didn't know I was listening." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his polished image beginning to crack. Lucas stood again, attempting to undermine him. "Mr. George, your hearing isn't what it used to be, is it? Isn't it possible you misheard?" George gave him a steady look. "Young man, my hearing is just fine when someone's talking about stealing from his own mother." Laughter and murmurs swept through the crowd. The judge struck his gavel sharply, but even he couldn't hide the faint twitch at the corner of his lips. Alice felt tears sting her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't standing alone. The courtroom grew tense as Emma stood once more, carrying a slim laptop and a stack of documents. Her voice was steady, deliberate. "Your Honor, the testimony of our witnesses has shown Mrs. Parker's clarity and independence, but words alone are not all we bring today. We also present forensic evidence." She connected the laptop to the courtroom projector. The screen lit up, showing 2 signatures side by side. One from the disputed will Daniel submitted, the other from Alice's verified bank documents. Emma pointed with a laser pen. "As you can see, every curve and angle is identical, not similar, but identical. That's impossible for a human hand to reproduce naturally. This is not handwriting. It is a digital copy, lifted from old records and pasted onto new documents." The audience murmured loudly. The judge leaned closer, squinting at the enlarged signatures. Emma continued, her tone sharp. "We also have a series of photographs taken directly from Daniel Parker's own notebook. These notes outline, in his handwriting, scan old signature, prepare fake will." She placed the printed photographs on the evidence table. The words scrawled across the page were messy but unmistakable. Gasps filled the room. Daniel's face flushed crimson. Lucas sprang to his feet, his voice raised. "Objection! These so-called notes could have been fabricated." But Emma cut him off smoothly, her voice like steel. "The photographs are time-stamped from Mrs. Parker's phone. The metadata verifies the date and time. These are authentic, and they prove premeditated fraud." All eyes turned to Daniel. His polished facade was cracking, sweat beading at his temples. Alice, sitting silently, clasped her hands together. Her heart pounded, but for the first time in months, hope surged through her veins. The judge rapped his gavel for silence, his expression stern. "This evidence is troubling, very troubling. Mr. Parker, you will have the opportunity to respond, but I will remind you perjury and fraud are criminal offenses." Daniel swallowed hard, his bravado slipping. Emma wasn't finished. She straightened her notes and said clearly, "Your Honor, beyond the forged documents, we also have audio evidence of Mr. Parker threatening a family member in order to conceal his fraud." At that moment, Sophia rose from her seat, clutching her phone tightly. She walked to the front, her face pale, but her voice steady. "This is a recording I made 3 weeks ago. Daniel didn't know I had my phone on when he confronted me." The bailiff took the phone, connected it to the court system, and a moment later, Daniel's voice filled the room, low, cold, unmistakable. "If you breathe a word about the house, I'll ruin you. I'll make everyone believe you're the thief, not me. Don't forget, I can turn the whole family against you just like I did with her." Gasps exploded across the courtroom. A few relatives covered their mouths. Others turned in their seats to glare at Daniel in disbelief. Alice's hands flew to her lips, tears welling in her eyes. Hearing her son's voice dripping with threats against Sophia, against herself cut deeper than any wound. Daniel shot up from his chair, face twisted in panic. "That's taken out of context. She set me up." But the judge slammed the gavel. "Silence, Mr. Parker. The recording is clear. Those were your words." Lucas pressed his lips together, avoiding his client's gaze. The once confident lawyer looked suddenly very small, flipping through his files with nothing left to say. Emma seized the moment. Her voice rang strong. "Your Honor, this recording proves Mr. Parker knowingly threatened a witness to cover his fraudulent scheme. Combined with the forged documents, it paints a picture not of a devoted son, but of a man willing to betray and intimidate for financial gain. We ask the court to dismiss his guardianship petition immediately and to open a formal investigation into his actions." The judge's face was grim. He looked at Daniel, who now stood pale and trembling, his arrogance drained away. For Alice, time seemed to slow. The years of pain, fear, and betrayal all gathered into this single moment, the moment the truth could no longer be denied. The judge adjusted his glasses, his expression stern as silence fell across the courtroom. Every eye was fixed on him. "After reviewing the testimonies, the forensic evidence, and the audio recording," he said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "this court finds the petition for guardianship filed by Daniel Parker to be without merit. The evidence strongly suggests deliberate fraud, including forgery of signatures and intimidation of witnesses." He struck the gavel once, the sound echoing like thunder. "Therefore, the petition is dismissed in its entirety. Furthermore, this court will refer the matter to the district attorney's office for a full criminal investigation into Mr. Parker's conduct." Gasps filled the room. Some relatives who had doubted Alice turned in their seats, their faces burning with shame. Others murmured angrily at Daniel. Alice sat frozen, her eyes brimming with tears. The words rang in her ears like a hymn. Petition dismissed. She clutched Emma's hand tightly, her body trembling not from fear, but from relief. Across the aisle, Daniel collapsed back into his chair, pale and shaken. The smug confidence that had carried him into court was gone, replaced by the hollow stare of a man cornered. Lucas quietly began packing his briefcase, refusing even to look at his client. The judge stood, delivering his final words before exiting. Mrs. Alice Parker retains full ownership and control of her home and assets. Court adjourned. He struck the gavel again, and the room erupted. Some people clapped, others whispered furiously, but all eyes turned toward Alice. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she straightened her shoulders, stood tall, and walked out of the courtroom with her head high. Emma and Sophia flanked her, George following close behind. She wasn't alone anymore. Behind her, Daniel was left sitting in disgrace, whispers of fraud and betrayal chasing him out of the very family he had tried to manipulate. Outside, the sunlight poured down, warm and bright. Alice tilted her face upward, breathing it in as though tasting freedom again for the first time. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "I won." News of the trial spread quickly. Within days, Daniel Parker's name was on everyone's lips, but not with admiration. At the local market, neighbors shook their heads. The man forged his own mother's signature? Shameful. Imagine trying to throw your mother out just for money. He's ruined. At cafes and street corners, people whispered with disgust. Daniel, once seen as an ambitious young man in real estate, was now branded the ungrateful son. The fallout was swift. His company issued a statement cutting ties with him for conduct damaging to the firm's integrity. Former associates stopped answering his calls. Even friends he used to party with disappeared, unwilling to be linked to his disgrace. Meanwhile, Alice found herself surrounded by quiet support. Neighbors came by with food and flowers, apologizing for believing the rumors. One woman took her hand and said, with tears in her eyes, "We should have trusted you. You were stronger than all of us." But in the evenings, when the house grew still, the victory felt bittersweet. Alice often sat in her living room, gazing at the old photographs on the wall. She would trace Daniel's smiling face with her finger and whisper, "Where did my boy go?" Sophia visited often, bringing warmth into the home. George, too, stopped by for tea, sitting with Alice on the porch like he had for years. And Emma checked in, making sure all the legal protections were in place. One evening, as the three of them sat together, Alice said softly, "I may have saved this house, but I've lost my son. That pain, it will never leave me." Sophia clasped her hand. "Oh, but you're not alone anymore. You still have us. You still have family, just not the kind bound by blood." Alice smiled faintly through her tears. She realized Sophia was right. Family wasn't just blood, it was loyalty, love, and standing together when storms hit. That night, for the first time in months, Alice slept without fear. The house, her red brick sanctuary, stood firm around her. It had survived the storm. So had she. A few weeks later, Alice made a quiet but resolute decision. She called Emma to her home, and together they sat at the wooden dining table that had witnessed both laughter and tears over the years. Alice's hands trembled slightly as she spoke, but her voice was steady. "I want to rewrite my will, Emma. This house, it won't go to Daniel. Not after everything. I want it to go to Sophia. She's the one who stood by me, who protected me when everyone else doubted." Sophia, sitting nearby, froze in shock. Cô ơi, cháu không thể nhận một điều lớn lao như thế. Cháu chỉ làm điều đúng đắn thôi." Alice reached for her hand, her eyes soft but unwavering. "Family isn't just blood, child. It's about who stands with you when the world turns against you. You've been more of a daughter to me than Daniel has been a son." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as Emma drafted the new document. With deliberate care, Alice signed her name at the bottom. This time, her signature wasn't forged or stolen. It was hers, strong and certain. When the pen left the paper, Alice felt a weight lift from her chest. For the first time, she was no longer afraid of losing the house or her dignity. She had taken control of her own story. Word of the new will spread quickly among the family. Some whispered that Alice was being cruel, cutting off her only son. Others nodded in agreement, saying it was justice. But Alice didn't seek approval anymore. She had made peace with her choice. George, when he heard the news, patted her shoulder. "You did right, Alice. A home should belong to those who cherish it, not those who see it as a price tag." That evening, Alice sat on her porch, watching the sun dip behind the red brick walls of her house. The garden glowed gold in the fading light. For the first time in years, she felt the house was truly safe, not just because it was legally hers, but because she had passed its legacy to someone who loved it as much as she did. One quiet morning, as Alice was trimming the yellow chrysanthemums in her garden, the postman handed her a single envelope. The handwriting on the front made her chest tighten. Immediately, it was Daniel's. She carried it inside, her fingers trembling as she broke the seal. The letter was short, written in his familiar bold strokes. "Mother, you think you've won. You think taking me to court, turning people against me, and changing your will means it's over. But you're wrong. I haven't given up. That house will be mine one day, no matter what you do, Daniel." Alice's breath caught. She sank into her chair, the letter fluttering in her lap like a dark omen. Even after losing in court, even after being exposed before the entire community, her son's obsession hadn't ended. She stared at the words, her heart aching. Was there no trace of the boy I raised left inside him? Or had greed devoured him completely? That evening, she showed the letter to Emma. The attorney frowned, her voice firm. "This isn't just bitterness, Alice. This could be considered harassment. We'll document it, keep it on record. If he tries anything again, we'll have proof of his intent." Sophia, sitting beside her, squeezed her hand. "Ko dung so. Noi anh ta quay lại, chung chao se ở đây. Anh ta không còn quyền gì với ngôi nhà này nữa." Alice nodded slowly, but later that night, as she sat alone in the living room, she couldn't stop the tears from falling. The house was safe, yes. The law was on her side, yes. But in her heart, she mourned the deeper loss the son she once knew, who now seemed like a stranger standing on the other side of a locked door. She whispered into the silence, her voice breaking. "Daniel, why couldn't love be enough for you?" The red brick house stood strong around her, but Alice knew the battle wasn't just about walls and deeds anymore. It was about a bond that had cracked so deeply it might never mend. Not long after the letter, the whispers began. At the market, Alice noticed people glancing at her, murmuring behind their hands. A neighbor she'd known for years avoided her eyes. Finally, one woman, unable to hold it in, blurted out, "Mrs. Parker, is it true that you're unstable? That Daniel only wanted guardianship because you've been forgetting things?" Alice's heart sank. She understood immediately Daniel was spreading rumors. Within days, the lies grew thicker. Some said Alice had attacked Sophia out of confusion. Others claimed she was hoarding money and mistreating her own son. The cruelest rumor of all, that she had fabricated the entire fraud case because she was jealous of Daniel's success. Alice felt the walls closing in again. The court had cleared her, but gossip was harder to silence. Every sideways glance stung like a thorn. One evening, Sophia arrived breathless, carrying her phone. "Koi, Nine." She showed Alice a social media post from an anonymous account. It contained twisted words. An old woman too senile to know what she's doing, manipulated by greedy outsiders. The comments were vicious, some even suggesting she should be placed in a nursing home. Alice pressed a hand to her chest, the weight almost unbearable. "It's him," she whispered. "Daniel won't stop." Emma, when shown the post, set her jaw. "He's playing a dangerous game." "Defamation, harassment. If we can tie this account back to him or his associates, he'll face even more charges." "But Alice's voice trembled. What if people believe him? Sophia knelt beside her. Co, the people who matter already know the truth. George, me, Emma, we stand by you. The rest, let them talk. They can't take your house, and they can't take your dignity. Alice wiped her eyes, breathing deeply. She knew Sophia was right. Still, the ache remained. Losing her son had been painful enough. Now he was trying to poison what little peace she had regained. That night, she wrote in her diary by the lamplight. He wants to break me with lies, but I've survived worse storms. The house is still mine. My voice is still mine. And I will not be silenced. The red brick home seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, a quiet reminder that though Daniel's shadow loomed, Alice's strength was far from broken. The rumors weren't enough for Daniel. When gossip failed to shake Alice, he turned to darker methods. One night, just past midnight, Alice was startled awake by the sound of gravel crunching outside her window. At first, she thought it was the wind. Then came the sharp thud of something hitting the porch. She hurried to the door, heart pounding. On the step lay a brick wrapped in paper. With trembling hands, she unrolled it. Scrawled across the sheet in red paint were the words, "Get out before it's too late." Alice's knees nearly buckled. Her own home, the place that had always been her refuge, suddenly felt like a trap. The next morning, she showed the note to Emma and Sophia. Emma's face hardened. This isn't just harassment anymore. This is intimidation. We'll take it straight to the police. But Alice shook her head, her voice breaking. What if it only makes things worse? What if he sends more people? Sophia took her hands firmly. Co, he wants you scared. That's his power. But if you stay quiet, he wins. Over the following week, the threats escalated. Strange men loitered near her gate at night. Once, when Alice returned from the store, she found her garden trampled, flowers crushed beneath heavy boots. Another time, she answered the phone only to hear a voice hiss, "The house isn't yours forever." Each act chipped away at her sense of safety. Yet even as fear gnawed at her, something deeper stirred a quiet defiance. One evening, after Sophia had gone home, Alice stood in her living room, staring at the photos of her late husband on the wall. She whispered to the stillness, "David, if you were here, you'd tell me not to give in. You'd tell me to fight. So I will. For you. For us." The next morning, she walked into Emma's office carrying the brick, the threatening notes, and a list of times she'd seen strangers near her house. Her voice shook, but her eyes were steady. "File the report," Alice said. "If Daniel wants a war, then I'll face him head on. I won't run from my own home." Emma nodded with quiet pride. "That's the spirit, Alice. He wanted to break you. Instead, you're stronger than ever." The police didn't take long to act once Emma filed the report. Within a week, 2 officers arrived at Alice's home to collect the brick, the threatening notes, and her written statement. They listened carefully as she described the strange men outside her gate, the late-night calls, the vandalized garden. When she finished, one officer nodded firmly. "Mrs. Parker, based on this evidence, we'll be opening a harassment and intimidation investigation. If your son is connected, he'll be held accountable." Alice's throat tightened. "So, you'll call him in?" "Yes, ma'am," the officer replied. "He'll be summoned for questioning." News spread quickly. Within days, Daniel received his notice to appear at the station. For the first time since the trial, he felt the walls closing in. At the police station, he sat across from 2 detectives, trying to maintain his calm. "Mr. Parker," one began, sliding the brick across the table. "Your mother received this on her porch. We also have anonymous phone records traced to numbers linked to your associates. Care to explain?" Daniel forced a laugh. "You think I threw a brick at my own mother's house? That's ridiculous." The detective's eyes narrowed. Then why did two witnesses place you near her property the same night this happened? And why did the threatening calls match the time frame of your meetings with certain men? For once, Daniel had no slick answer. He shifted in his seat, sweat forming at his temple. I don't know what those men did. Maybe they acted on their own. I never told anyone to threaten her. But the detectives weren't convinced. One of them leaned forward. Listen carefully, Mr. Parker. You're already under investigation for fraud and forgery. If we find proof you orchestrated harassment against your own mother, you'll be facing criminal charges serious enough to put you behind bars. Do you understand? Daniel swallowed hard. His mask of arrogance was slipping. Back at home, Alice sat with Sophia and George on the porch, sipping tea as evening fell. Though fear still lingered in her chest, hearing that Daniel had been summoned gave her a fragile sense of relief. For the first time, the law itself stood between her and his schemes. She whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else, "He can throw bricks, he can spread lies, but he can't take away my strength. Not anymore." The investigation closed in faster than Daniel expected. Within weeks, evidence began to pile up witnesses who saw men loitering near Alice's house, call records tied to prepaid phones he had purchased, even a message trail showing transfers of money from Daniel's account to one of the men who delivered the threats. This time, there was no way out. Daniel was formally charged with harassment, intimidation, and attempted fraud. News outlets picked up the story, painting him as a fallen real estate agent who tried to steal from his own mother. His once proud name became a stain, whispered with contempt across the city. His career collapsed overnight. The firm that had already distanced itself now announced his permanent removal. Banks blacklisted him. Partners withdrew. Even friends avoided his calls. He became, in the eyes of the community, untouchable. For Alice, it was bittersweet. She never celebrated his downfall. In the quiet of her home, she still looked at the old photographs Daniel as a child, holding her hand, laughing in the garden. Sometimes she whispered, "Where did you go, my son?" But alongside the sorrow, peace slowly returned. Neighbors who once doubted her now visited often, bringing pies, flowers, and words of apology. Sophia remained by her side faithfully, while George came each morning to share tea on the porch, and Emma, ever steady, guided her through the final legal steps to ensure her home was safe forever. One golden afternoon, Alice stood in her garden, the chrysanthemums in full bloom. The red brick house glowed in the sunlight, strong and enduring, just like her. Sophia walked up beside her, smiling. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Alice nodded, her voice soft but certain. "This house has seen betrayal and storms, but it has also seen love, and in the end, love is what lasts." She took Sophia's hand, squeezing it gently. For the first time in months, she felt no fear of tomorrow. Daniel's shadow had finally lifted. A few months later, when life had settled into its quiet rhythm again, Alice sat at her desk by the window with a fresh notebook before her. The garden outside swayed gently in the summer breeze, the chrysanthemums glowing gold under the sun. She picked up her pen and began to write, not for lawyers, not for courts, but for the future, for herself, for Sophia, for anyone who might one day read her words. "This house has been my battle and my shield. I nearly lost it not because of strangers, but because of the one I loved most. That pain will never fully leave me. But I have learned something greater. Blood alone does not make family. Loyalty does, kindness does, truth does. Daniel chose greed over love, and though I will always grieve the boy he once was, I cannot let his choices destroy me. The house still stands. So do I. And thanks to those who stood by me, Sophia, Emma, George, I found the courage to fight when I thought I had none left. If these words reach someone who feels powerless, remember this: you are stronger than you know. No matter how dark the storm, there is always a light to fight for. Hold on to it. Defend it. And never let fear silence you. Alice signed her name at the bottom, her hand steady and sure. She placed the letter in the same box where she kept her diary and important papers, knowing that one day Sophia would find it. Then she closed the notebook, stood, and stepped out onto the porch. The red brick house rose behind her, bathed in sunlight, no longer a fortress of fear, but a sanctuary of survival. Alice breathed deeply, a smile touching her lips. For the first time in a long time, she felt free.